The .44 caliber slug was the only law on the Llano Estacado, and it had failed to kill the man in Emily Thorne's root cellar. He was Comanche. She was a settler, a widow with nothing left to lose but her life. And the men who put the bullet in him, white men, her own people, were coming back to finish the job. They rode under the banner of justice, but their hearts were full of greed. They didn't know their real target was the woman who dared to save an enemy, and they didn't know that enemy was a chief. This is the story of how a lone woman became a legend, and how the blood of a battle earned her a new name, the Woman of the Red Moon. The wind on the high plains of Texas was a living thing. It had no lungs, but it screamed. It had no hands, but it clawed at the sod roof of Emily Thorne's dugout, stealing precious warmth and leaving a fine layer of grit on every surface. Emily was a woman carved from the same hard land. She'd come west with her husband Amos, full of dreams that had dried up and blown away long before the cholera took him. Now she was alone. At 28, her face was already a map of sun-scorched resilience. Her hands calloused her eyes the color of the faded denim she wore. She was 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, the belligerent, land-hungry Jonas McCrory, and 100 miles from anything resembling civilization. On this day, the sky was a bruised, yellowish gray, the color of an impending norther. A dust storm was brewing. Emily was securing the door to her small chicken coop when she heard it. Not the wind, but something that cut through it. A gunshot, then another. She flattened herself against the rough wood of her cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her rifle, an old 1860 Henry, was just inside the door. She'd learned from Amos, you don't look, you listen. The sound of hoofbeats followed, frantic pounding. Then a terrible guttural cry. It wasn't the yee-haw of a cowboy. It was a sound of pure agony. She waited, every nerve singing, for what felt like an hour. The wind howled mercifully, covering her position. When the dust settled slightly, she crept to the edge of her property, near the dry arroyo that marked her boundary. That's where she saw him. He was face down in the dirt, a man in buckskins. His long black hair was matted with blood and mud. A horse, magnificent, but spent, lay dead 20 yards away, its flank riddled with bullets. He was Comanche. Emily's first instinct was terror. The Comanche were shadows, the lords of the plains, whispered about in snatched breaths. They were the reason she kept her rifle loaded. Her second instinct was to run. Bar the door, hide, pray. But then he moved. A pained, shuddering breath that kicked up a tiny puff of dust. She scanned the horizon. Nothing. The shooters, likely McCrory and his regulators, must have thought the job was done. They'd shoot a Comanche on sight, no questions asked. Emily approached him as one might a cornered wolf. She nudged his boot with her own. He was heavy, well-built. A gurgling sound came from his lips. She saw the wound. It was high on his back, near the shoulder. A .44 slug, by the look of the hole. It was bleeding, but it wasn't the real problem. He'd been breathing dust. He was dying of the wound of exposure and of drowning in his own blood. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered. But she knew the Lord was far from this place. She looked at her home, a small mound of earth and wood, a fortress of solitude. If she brought him in, she was signing her own death warrant. If McCrory found out, he'd brand her an Indian lover and burn her out. Or worse, if she left him, he would be dead by nightfall. Damn it all! She cursed a word she rarely used. She couldn't watch another living thing die out here. He was heavy. She was strong. Grunting, straining, she half-dragged, half-carried him across the 100 yards of exposed ground. Her muscles burned, her lungs ached. He was delirious, muttering in a language she didn't understand, his body hot with a building fever. She didn't take him inside the cabin. Too obvious. Instead, she hauled him to the root cellar, its door a flat, heavy plank, hidden by a tangle of dead vines. She wrestled him down the narrow steps into the cool, earthy dark. She lit a single lantern. His face in the flickering light was stern even in unconsciousness. High cheekbones, a strong nose, a scar along his jaw. This was not just a warrior. This was a man of authority. He was a dead man if she didn't work fast. She barred the cellar door from the inside, plunging them into near total darkness. She ripped a strip from her own petticoat, her last civilized item, and pressed it against the wound. He groaned, his body tensing. "Hush," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. "Just hush." Outside, the wind began its long, lonely scream. Emily Thorne, a widow on the edge of the world, was now in a dark hole, harboring the one man her world had taught her to hate and fear above all others. The drama had not even begun. For 2 days, the world was the cellar. The space was tight-smelling of damp earth potatoes and the sharp metallic tang of blood. Emily worked by the sliver of light that came through the ventilation shaft, and the brief, dangerous moments she used her lantern. The man, she couldn't think of him as anything else, drifted in a sea of fever. She'd managed to get the bullet out. It was a messy, agonizing process. She'd sterilized her father's skinning knife in the lantern's flame, fed the man a stick to bite, and dug for the metal. He hadn't screamed, but a low, guttural sound had vibrated through the cellar, a sound of such controlled agony it chilled her more than any shout. The slug was heavy lead, a white man's bullet. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, the last of Amos's bottle, and packed it with a poultice of yarrow and comfrey she kept dried in bunches. Her knowledge was in herbs and husbandry, not men. But the principle was the same. Stop the bleeding fight. The fever pray, the rot didn't set in. He spoke, but his words were for the spirits. He'd call out a name, Tia Becha, then Isatai. His voice, even in delirium, held a terrifying command. On the 3rd morning, the fever was at its peak. He was burning. His skin was slick, his breathing shallow. Emily was exhausted, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. She sat against the far wall, her rifle across her lap, watching him. He was the enemy. He was her patient. The two thoughts warred in her head until she couldn't tell them apart. Then she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. Hoofbeats. Not one rider, but several. They were slow, deliberate. They were stopping at her cabin. She heard a heavy boot stomp on her porch, followed by a hard, demanding knock on the door. "Emily Thorne, you in there, woman?" The voice was like gravel in a tin cup. Jonas McCrory. In the cellar, the Comanche chief's eyes snapped open. They weren't delirious. They were sharp, assessing. He'd heard the voice. He looked at Emily, and a silent, terrifying understanding passed between them. "Emily!" McCrory shouted again, rattling the door in its frame. She had no choice. She looked at the chief, put a finger to her lips in a universal gesture of silence, and quietly unbarred the cellar's internal lock. She slipped up the steps, emerging into her cabin and closing the heavy trap door, sliding the worn rug over it. Her heart felt like a rabbit in a snare. She took a deep breath, wiped the cellar damp from her hands, and opened the door. Jonas McCrory filled the doorway. He was a big man, his gut hanging over a gun belt, his face red and beaded with sweat under a wide-brimmed hat. Flanking him were two of his regulators, lean, mean-eyed men named Jeb and Pike. "Took you long enough, widow." McCrory grunted, his eyes roving past her, scanning the small cabin. "I was mending." Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you want, Jonas? What do I want, Justice? What else?" McCrory stepped inside without being invited, forcing Emily to back away. His spurs chimed on her floorboards. "We was tracking a buck, a big one. Looks like he was part of that raid on the Johnson Creek. Killed his horse not 2 miles from here, but the devil vanished. You seen anything? Any sign?" Emily's hands were tight fists at her sides. "Just the dust storm, Jonas. I've been inside." McCrory laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A little thing like you all alone out here. It's a miracle you ain't been scalped. Course that's what I'm here for, to protect our women." He walked the perimeter of the one-room cabin, picking things up. He lifted her empty whiskey bottle. "Drinking alone, Emily?" "That was for medicine," she said, her voice sharp. "Right. Medicine." He set it down. His eyes fell on the rug that covered the cellar door. "Still keeping that cellar stocked. Potatoes, turnips." "Uh-huh." He put his heavy boot on the edge of the rug. Emily stopped breathing. From beneath the floor there came a faint, muffled thud. Emily's mind raced. The chief. He was trying to warn her, or trying to break out. McCrory's head snapped up. "What was that?" "Rats," Emily said instantly. "This whole place is built on 'em, or the house settling. It's a dugout, Jonas, not a palace." McCrory stared at her. His little eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. He knew she was lying, but he couldn't prove it. "You watch yourself, Emily," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing quiet. "This is hard country. It ain't for the weak, and it really ain't for Indian lovers. We find that buck, we're gonna string him up, and if we find anyone who helped him, well, rope is cheap." He backed out of the door, his eyes never leaving hers. "Jeb Pike, let's check the arroyo again. He's bleeding. He can't have gone far." Emily watched them mount their horses and ride off. She didn't move until they were tiny specks in the distance. Only then did she bolt the door and collapse against it, her legs finally giving way. She waited a full 10 minutes before she dared to lift the trapdoor. She descended into the darkness. The chief had pushed himself into a sitting position against the wall. His face was pale, sheened with sweat, but his eyes were blazing. He had understood every word or at all events the tone. He pointed at the floor, then at her. Then he drew a finger across his own throat. He knew. "They'll be back," Emily whispered. He nodded once. He reached out and with surprising strength grabbed her wrist. He pulled her closer. His voice was a dry rasp, but the word was clear. "Pia," he said. "Water." She brought him water. He drank. Then he looked at the wound on his back, then at her. He pointed to himself. "Comanche," he said. It was his name. He was introducing himself. Then he pointed at the bullet she had dug from his back, which lay on a small shelf. He mimed holding a rifle. He pointed at the door above them and said one word with such venom it needed no translation. "McCrory." Emily's blood froze. This wasn't a random raid. The Chief Comanche knew her neighbor. This was an ambush, and Jonas McCrory was the one who pulled the trigger. The revelation changed everything. This was no longer a simple act of mercy. Emily was now a conspirator, shielding a man from a specific known enemy, an enemy who was also her enemy. Jonas McCrory had been trying to buy her land for pennies ever since Amos died, using intimidation and veiled threats. Now she understood. He wasn't just a bully. He was an assassin. Comanche's recovery accelerated. It was the will as much as the flesh. He was a man with a purpose. The cellar was no longer a hospital. It was a bunker. Communication became a strange, silent ballet. They had no words in common, save his name, Comanche, and the name of their shared foe, McCrory. But they developed a language. He would point to the herbs she used, and she would show him yarrow to clot willow bark, for fever, comfrey to knit. He in turn showed her a Comanche trick for the wound, using the clean, cool mud from the cellar's deepest wall to draw out the last of the heat, then sealing it with the sticky resin from a pine cone she'd collected for kindling. They shared food. She brought down jerky and hardtack. He refused it. He pointed to the potatoes. He used her skinning knife, the one that had cut him to shave thin slices, roasting them over the low, smoky flame of the lantern. It was a shared meal, a treaty. In those long, dark hours, the savage of McCrory's stories evaporated. Emily saw a man. She saw the intricate beadwork on his moccasins, one of which was damaged from the fall. She watched him painstakingly repair it with a thread from her sewing kit and a needle he'd fashioned from a chicken bone. She saw the intelligence in his eyes as he watched her too, learning her rhythms, her habits. One evening he held up his hand, fingers splayed. He pointed to his ring finger. He looked at her. Emily understood. "Husband." She shook her head. She pointed to the ground and mimed a deep sleep. "Amos. Gone." Comanche nodded, a grave understanding. He then held up his hand, pointed to his ring finger, and nodded. He was married. He pointed to his chest, then held up 2 small fingers. 2 children. He mimed rocking a baby, and his face, for a split second, softened with a tenderness that stunned her. He was fighting to get back to them. The next day, Emily took a risk. She left the cellar, her rifle in hand, and scouted her own land. She found what she was looking for in the arroyo. Tracks. Not just McCrory's men, but shod horse tracks. Cavalry. McCrory had done it. He'd ridden to the nearest fort. He was reporting a Comanche raid, and likely a missing woman, Emily herself. He was escalating. He wasn't just trying to kill a chief. He was trying to start a war. She ran back to the cabin, her heart pounding. She threw open the trap door. "Cavalry," she said, not knowing if he'd understand the word. She mimed a bugle and pointed east. Comanche understood. "Bluecoats." He stood up. He was weak, his legs shaking, but he stood. He tore a strip of fabric from his own buckskin leggings, and with agonizing slowness began to bind his wound tightly. He was preparing to move. "You can't," Emily said, grabbing his arm. "You're not healed. You'll die out there." He looked at her, his dark eyes unblinking. He conveyed with a simple, stark look that to be found here in a white woman's cellar would be a worse death. For both of them. He checked her rifle, the 1860 Henry. He noted its lever action, its 16-shot capacity. He nodded his approval. He handed it back to her. He would use his knife. Emily grabbed her satchel. She stuffed it with the last of the jerky, a canteen of water, and all her dried herbs. She was all in now. Her old life was over. "We can't go north," she said, thinking aloud. "Or east. That's where the cavalry will come from." Comanche pointed south, then west, toward the heart of the Comanche area, toward his people. "They'll kill me," she whispered. "Your people. They'll—" Comanche met her gaze. He said nothing. There were no guarantees. He was offering her a chance, not safety. It was the same chance she had offered him. A noise from outside snapped them to attention, a single horse approaching fast. They both froze. Emily crept up the steps and peered through a crack in the cabin window. It wasn't McCrory, it wasn't the cavalry. It was a boy no older than 15 on a lathered pony. It was Tom, the son of her nearest friendly neighbor, Ezra, who lived 10 miles south. Emily ran outside, waving. "Tom, what is it?" The boy was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Miss Thorne, it's Pa McCrory and his men. They came by. They said you'd been taken by Comanche. They said Pa was a sympathizer for not joining their regulators. They beat him, Miss Thorne. They beat him bad. And they shot his cattle. He's trying to burn everyone out," Emily whispered, the cold, hard malice of it settling on her. "Pa sent me," the boy choked out. "He said to warn you. He said McCrory's not just with the cavalry. He's hired on a tracker. A man named—" The boy shuddered. "A man named Isatai." A cold dread, heavier than anything she'd felt, washed over Emily. She turned and looked at the cellar door. From the darkness below, Kamatia's voice, sharp and full of a new personal horror, echoed a single name. Isatai. The name hung in the air, thick with betrayal. Emily looked from the frightened boy back to her cabin. "Tom, you ride. You ride home and you bar the door. Don't light any lamps tonight. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." He wheeled his pony and was gone in a cloud of dust. Emily plunged back into the cellar. Kamatia was on his feet, his face a mask of cold fury. "Isatai," Emily said, testing the name. "Who is he?" Kamatia's hand signs were sharp, angry. He pointed to his head, then mimed a chant. "Medicine man." Then he drew a hand across his heart and turned it outward. Betrayal. Isatai was his tribe's shaman, his spiritual advisor, and he was working for McCrory. This was worse than an ambush. It was a coup. Isatai perhaps jealous of Kamatia's power, or bought by McCrory's whiskey, and rifles had turned. "He knows where you will go," Emily realized. "He knows your secret places." Kamatia nodded grimly. He looked at her, and his eyes held a new respect. She was no longer just a nurse. She was an ally. He grabbed his knife. He would not be taken. "No!" Emily said, her mind working faster than it ever had. "We don't fight. Not here. We run." But as she spoke, the acrid smell of smoke began to curl through the ventilation shaft. A voice roared from outside. "McCrory's. I know you're in there, you filth, and I know you've got her." Another voice, high-pitched and chanting, joined him. "Isatai. He's in the earth." The shaman's voice cried in broken English. "The snake is in the earth. Burn it!" McCrory bellowed. "Burn it all." Emily heard the whoosh of kerosene being splashed on her cabin walls. She heard the thump as a torch was thrown onto the sod roof. Her home. "The gully," Emily choked out. "There's a crawl space. Amos dug it for storms." She ran to the back of the cellar, clawing at a pile of old potato sacks. Behind them was a set of loose stones. She pulled them away, revealing a dark, narrow opening. "It leads to the arroyo. It's tight." Kamatia didn't hesitate. He was wounded, but he was a chief. He moved with a snake's fluid economy. He slid into the tunnel, feet first, hissing as his injured shoulder scraped the rock. Emily grabbed her rifle and the satchel. She looked back at her cellar, her last sanctuary, now filling with smoke. It was all gone. "Come, white woman." Kamatia's voice, tight with pain, came from the tunnel. She scrambled in after him. The tunnel was barely 2 feet wide. It was a grave. They wormed their way on their bellies, the smoke chasing them, the roar of the fire above them, sounding like a monstrous beast. Emily's lungs were on fire. She could feel the heat through the earth. Kamatia in front of her suddenly stopped. "What?" She panted, her voice a dry squeak. "Listen." The sound of the fire was overwhelming. But beneath it, thump, thump, thump. Someone was in the cellar. They were smashing things, looking for the bodies. "He knows," Kamatia's voice echoed back. "Isatai. He knows this trick." They moved faster. Emily's nails were broken, her fingers raw. She pushed the satchel ahead of her inch by agonizing inch. Then a glorious, wonderful sensation cool, fresh air on her face. They tumbled out of the tunnel's exit, which was hidden by a thicket of mesquite, and into the deep gully of the arroyo. They were 50 yards from the cabin, which was now a roaring inferno against the twilight sky. McCrory and his men were silhouettes, dancing around the fire, firing their pistols into the flames. They were celebrating. "They think we're dead," Emily whispered, daring to hope. "He does not," Comanche said, gesturing to Isatai, who was standing apart, his head cocked, listening. The shaman turned his gaze, sweeping the plains. His eyes seemed to pierce the darkness and find the exact spot they were hiding. He pointed. He shouted. "They're coming!" Emily grabbed Comanche's arm. "Run!" They ran. It was a flight of the damned. A wounded chief and a lone woman on foot, with a dozen armed men and a mystic on their trail. They ran south into the Badlands, a maze of canyons and broken rock where a horse was a liability. This was Comanche's territory. He might be wounded, but the land was his. He led her in a way she'd never have found, not just on the ground, but through it. They waded through shallow creeks to hide their scent. They used high ridges to watch their pursuers, then slipped down shale slides to erase their trail. Comanche was a shadow, but he was fading. The run had reopened his wound. He was leaving a trail of blood, and Emily's heart sank. Isatai would see it. As the moon, a pale sliver, rose, they found themselves on a high, narrow ridge, a sheer drop on either side. A box canyon. "We are trapped," Emily panted, her rifle heavy in her hands. Comanche shook his head. He pointed to a small, dark opening in the rock face. A cave. They scrambled inside, collapsing into the darkness. They could hear the shouts of McCrory's men echoing up from the canyon floor. "He's here." It was Isatai's voice. "The spirits of the rock told me he is here, and the woman is with him." A shot rang out the bullet, ricocheting off the rock near the cave's mouth. "Give him up, Emily!" McCrory's voice was triumphant. "Give us the buck and we'll let you live. May even make you my wife, seeing as you're homeless now." A rock of pure, cold hatred formed in Emily's stomach. She checked the action on her Henry. 16 shots. "I have 10 men, woman," McCrory shouted. "And you have 1 wounded." Comanche pulled himself to the mouth of the cave. He unslung his knife. He was preparing for a final, suicidal charge. "No," Emily said. She grabbed his arm. "We wait." "Wait for what?" He rasped, his body trembling with fever and rage. Emily didn't know. And then from the other side of the canyon, a sound emerged. A low, haunting sound that was not the wind. It was a call like a prairie wolf, but not. "A woo!" Comanche's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been dull with pain, suddenly blazed with a fierce, terrifying light. He put his hand to his mouth and answered the call. A moment later, the opposite ridge of the canyon was lined with them. 10, 20, maybe 30 Comanche warriors on horseback, materializing from the night like ghosts. They were backlit by the rising moon. McCrory's men stopped shouting. The silence on the canyon floor was absolute. "We're saved," Emily breathed. Comanche looked at her. His expression was not one of relief. It was one of cold calculation. "No," he said in his own language, but she understood. They weren't saved. They were just in a different kind of trouble. The leader of the war party, a formidable woman in a painted vest, her hair in braids, leveled a lance in their direction. It was the woman from his fever dreams. "Tiabecha," Comanche whispered. His wife. The arrival of the war party shifted the balance of power instantly and violently. Down in the canyon, Jonas McCrory and his men were frozen. They had been the hunters. Now they were rats in a trap. The woman on the ridge, Tiabecha, raised her lance. It was not a signal of rescue. It was a challenge. She was in command. Comatia, weak as he was, stood at the mouth of the cave. He called out to her. His voice was strong, echoing. A short, guttural exchange. Emily couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Tiabetcha was furious. A brief, brutal skirmish erupted. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Arrows rained down. McCrory's men panicked. They were ranchers and thugs, not soldiers. They broke. "Don't shoot!" McCrory yelled, throwing down his rifle. We got a truce. We got Isatai." The medicine man stepped forward, his hands raised. "I am Penateka. I am your brother." Tiabetcha spat on the ground. She gave a sharp order. 2 warriors rode down the incline, grabbed Isatai, and bound his hands. They ignored McCrory completely. The rest of McCrory's men, including Jeb and Pike, scattered, riding their horses, madly back the way they came. The warriors let them go. They weren't the target. Tiabetcha and 3 other warriors dismounted and climbed the ridge to the cave. Emily shrank back, raising her rifle. Comatia put his hand on the barrel and pushed it down. No. Tiabetcha entered the cave. She was tall, and her presence filled the small space. Her eyes were black, hard chips of obsidian. She looked at her husband, Comatia, her face a mask of anger and relief. Then her gaze fell on Emily. The look she gave her was not of a woman. It was of a predator. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She said something to Comatia. He replied, his voice low. Tiabetcha's hand flashed out, and she slapped Emily across the face. The blow sent her reeling, her head cracking against the cave wall. Emily tasted blood. Comatia grabbed his wife's wrist, hissing a word. The standoff was broken by the arrival of the other warriors who helped Comatia to his feet. He was their chief, but he was also a man who had been tended by a white woman. His authority was in question. Emily was seized. Her rifle and satchel were torn from her. Her hands were bound. She was no savior. She was a captive. They were taken to the Comanche camp, a collection of teepees hidden in a deep, sheltered valley. It was a world Emily had never seen. The air was filled with the smoke of buffalo dung fires, the smell of roasted meat, and the sounds of a living community. But it was a community in mourning. As they entered, the camp fell silent. Women, children, and old men emerged, their faces grim. Emily was thrown to the ground in the center of the camp. Comatia was taken to a large teepee, his wife and the warriors following. Isatai, the traitorous shaman, was tied to a post. His face beaten, his fate already sealed. Emily was alone. Utterly. Children poked her with sticks. Women muttered and spat at her. One old woman, her face a web of wrinkles, pulled at Emily's light brown hair, as if to see if it were real. Hours passed. The sun set. Emily was left tied, thirsty and cold. Finally, the flap of the chief's teepee opened. Comatia emerged, followed by Tiabetcha and several elders. A great fire was lit. The entire tribe gathered. A trial was convened. Comatia spoke first. He was weak, supported by 2 men, but his voice was clear. He told the story. Emily could piece it together from his gestures. He pointed west the ambush. He mimed being shot. He pointed to the ground, the cellar. He pointed at Emily. A great murmur rose from the crowd. Then Tiabetcha spoke. Her voice was a razor. She pointed at Emily, then at the children. She spoke of the raids by white men, of the broken treaties, of the sicknesses they brought. She pointed to Isatai, and then to Emily, as if they were 2 sides of the same white man's coin. She was the enemy. She must die. The tribe was split. Then a new player emerged, the man Comatia had named in his fever. Isatai. Wait, Emily looked again. The man tied to the post was not the man who had been with McCrory. That man was a fraud, a renegade. This man who now stepped from the crowd was the real Isatai. He was ancient, his body bent, his eyes holding a fearsome, knowing power. He walked to the center and raised a staff. The crowd fell silent. He did not look at Emily. He looked at Comanche. He spoke his voice like rocks grinding together. He challenged Comanche. "You were saved by her," he seemed to say. "Your medicine is weak. The white man's medicine has infected you." He was challenging Comanche's right to rule. The tribe was balanced on a knife edge. Comanche had brought a curse, a white woman, into their midst. Comanche, seeing his power slip, made a desperate gamble. He pointed at Emily. He said her herbs, her medicine, had fought the fever, when his own strength had failed. Isatai laughed. He issued a challenge. He led Emily to a teepee on the edge of camp. Inside, a child was dying. A small boy, about 5 years old, was shivering with fever, his breathing ragged. It was the coughing sickness, whooping cough. Isatai had tried his chance, his herbs. Nothing worked. He turned to Emily, his eyes a challenge. "If your medicine is strong, save him." It was a test she couldn't win. If the child died, she was a fraud, and she would be killed. If the child lived, she had no idea what would happen. Emily looked at the boy. He was the same age her nephew back in Ohio would have been. She forgot the tribe. She forgot the danger. She saw only the child. She opened her satchel, which a warrior had contemptuously thrown at her feet. She still had her willow bark for fever. She had dried thyme for the cough, and she had a small, precious bottle of laudanum, the last of her civilized medicine. She ground the bark and thyme together. She looked at Isatai. Boiling water. He nodded. She worked. She created a steam, forcing the boy to inhale the thyme. She brewed a bitter tea of willow bark. The boy was too weak to drink. Tiabecha was at the flap of the teepee, watching her face, a stone. Emily dipped her finger in the laudanum, a dangerous tiny dose, and rubbed it on the boy's gums to stop the coughing spasms. She sat all night. The entire tribe, it seemed, was watching the teepee. Isatai sat in the corner, his eyes closed, chanting. Comanche stood at the entrance, his face drawn. As dawn approached, the boy's coughing eased. His fever, which had been raging, finally broke. He fell into a deep, natural sleep. Emily, covered in sweat and grime, her hands, shaking from exhaustion, sat back. Isatai opened his eyes. He looked at the boy. He looked at Emily. He nodded once, a gesture of profound, begrudging respect. Emily walked out of the teepee into the morning light. The tribe parted for her. Tiabecha was still there, but the hatred in her eyes had been replaced by something else, a confused, terrible gratitude. The boy she had saved was her son. The saving of Tiabecha's son, Perua Little Beaver, changed Emily's status, but it didn't make her a friend. It made her a puzzle. She was no longer a captive, but she was not free. She was a Tesha Pia, a white woman, a walking omen. Tiabecha, a proud and fierce woman, was now bound by a life debt to the person she hated most. She provided for Emily, bringing her food and skins, but would not speak to her. The tension between them was a thick, unbreathable fog. Comanche, his power base, secured by the miracle and the capture of the false shaman, was focused on the greater threat. He knew McCrory was not finished. He knew the cavalry at Fort Sill would be massing. McCrory's lie of a kidnapping would be his pretext. Emily found a role. She was a healer. The women of the tribe, wary at first, began to bring her small cuts, fevers and aches. Her settler medicine, simple hygiene, boiled water, specific herbs worked in ways their own did not. She learned from them too. They taught her to use prickly pear to bind a deep wound and osha root for snakebite. She was given her own teepee, small and on the edge of camp. She was an outcast, but a useful one. Weeks passed. Emily's hair grew longer. Her skin darkened under the sun. She learned scraps of the language. She learned to ride a Comanche pony bareback. She was in essence becoming a ghost, her old life a distant dream. Then the inevitable came. A scout riding a lathered horse arrived at dawn. "Blue coats, 2 days' ride. Many." The camp exploded into organized chaos. This was not a raid, it was an army. Comanche, now fully healed, was a man of fire. He gave orders. The women would pack. They would move the camp to the high canyons. The warriors would stay. They would fight a delaying action. Emily was packing her own meager belongings when Tia Betcha entered her teepee. "You come," Tia Betcha said in broken English. It was the first time she had spoken to her. I should stay," Emily said. "I can help the wounded." Tia Betcha's face twisted. "You. Help." She pointed to the west, where the women and children were fleeing. "You. Go." "No," Emily said, a new strength in her voice. "He is your husband, but he is He is the reason I am here. I will not run. I will help." Tia Betcha looked at her, a strange, flickering light in her eyes. She tossed Emily a buckskin shirt. "Then you will die." The battle began at dawn, not with a bugle, but with the thunder of 100 horses. The cavalry, led by a hard-line colonel named Gideon Rourke, charged the valley. And guiding them, his face triumphant, was Jonas McCrory. It was a trap. Comanche had not fled. He and his warriors were hidden in the rocks above the valley. The first volley of arrows and rifle fire was devastating. Horses and men went down. Colonel Rourke, a veteran, realized his mistake. He was caught. The battle raged for hours. Emily, her teepee, now a field hospital, worked with Isatai. They were a strange team, his chants and her bandages. They were losing. The cavalry had superior firepower. They were dismounting, forming a skirmish line, advancing. Comanche on his painted war horse was everywhere, a brilliant, terrifying target. McCrory wasn't fighting. He was looting. He and his men, now in cavalry uniforms, were setting fire to the abandoned teepees looking for plunder. "They're burning the camp," Emily yelled, realizing her own teepee was in the line of fire. Suddenly a new sound, a child's scream. Emily's heart stopped. From a teepee near the edge of the camp, one she thought was empty, a small figure emerged, coughing, his eyes wide with terror. It was Parua, Tia Betcha's son. He had hidden, and now he was trapped by the flames. Emily didn't think. She ran. She sprinted across the open ground, bullets from the skirmish line, kicking up dust around her. "Emily, no!" She heard Comanche roar. She dove into the burning teepee. The smoke was thick, blinding. She found Parua huddled under a buffalo robe. She grabbed him, threw him over her shoulder, and turned to flee. As she burst from the teepee, a stray bullet from one of Rourke's men, meant for a warrior, found her. It struck her high in the shoulder. The force spun her around, but she did not fall. She clutched the boy, her buckskin shirt instantly soaking, turning a deep, dark crimson. The setting sun, a bloody, gaseous orb, was filtered through the smoke of the battle. It cast the entire world in a hellish red light, and in that moment, the moon, full and pale, began to rise. A lunar eclipse was starting. As the shadow of the earth began to cover the moon, it too took on a dim, coppery red glow. The battle paused. Soldiers and warriors alike stared at the figure in the center of the field. A white woman, her clothes and skin bathed in the crimson light of the setting sun, the smoke and the eclipse. Her own blood, black in the strange light, poured from her shoulder. She held a Comanche child in her arms. She looked, Isatai later said, like a spirit of vengeance, a manifestation of the blood that had been spilled. She took 3 steps toward the battle line and collapsed. Enough. Kamatia's voice, a sound of pure authority, echoed across the valley. He rode his horse into the open, his hands raised. Tiabecha, seeing her son, ran from the rocks, screaming. Colonel Rourke, his face grim, lowered his binoculars. He too had seen the woman. He'd seen her run into the fire. He had seen her shot by his own man. His kidnapped victim had just saved a Comanche child. "Cease fire!" Rourke bellowed. "Cease fire!" He looked at the man beside him. "McCrory!" He spat. "You've got some explaining to do." As the battlefield fell into a stunned silence, bathed in the eerie light of the blood moon, Isatai, the shaman, and Tiabech, the mother, both ran to the fallen woman, the woman of the red moon. The ceasefire was a fragile, breathing thing. Colonel Rourke, his face like granite, rode to the center of the field under a white flag. Comatia met him, flanked by a seething Tiabecha, who was clutching her son. Emily lay on a stretcher, conscious but pale. Isatai was pressing a thick pad of moss to her shoulder, stemming the bleeding. "Colonel Gideon Rourke," the soldier said, dismounting. "By what authority do you attack a U.S. regiment? By what authority? Comatia countered his English, surprisingly good. Do you attack my people on land, given by treaty under the guidance of a murderer?" Rourke's eyes narrowed. "I was told this man," he gestured to McCrory, who was hanging back, "was rescuing a kidnapped white woman, Mrs. Emily Thorne." "I was not kidnapped." Emily's voice, though weak, was clear. It cut through the silence. All eyes turned to her. "Colonel," she said, pushing herself up on one elbow, "that man, Jonas McCrory, ambushed Chief Comatia on my land. He tried to murder him. I saved him. McCrory. He burned my home. He burned me out because I wouldn't sell him my land." "That's a lie," McCrory shouted, spurring his horse forward. "She's an Indian lover. She's been brainwashed." "Then what is this?" Emily asked. She reached into the satchel that was still miraculously by her side. She tossed a heavy, misshapen piece of lead to the ground. "The bullet," Comatia said. "From his gun." Rourke dismounted, picked up the slug. He looked at it. He looked at McCrory's hip where a custom-plated Colt pistol rested. He had seen McCrory showing off his hand-tooled bullets at the fort. "It was an ambush," Emily said, her voice gaining strength. "He wanted Comatia dead so he could blame the Comanche, start a war, and seize the land under the protection of the army." Rourke's face was dark. He knew he had been played. He had lost 10 men on a lie. McCrory saw the tide turn. His face, which had been triumphant, became a mask of pure panic. He was a cornered animal. "She's a liar, they're all—" He raised his pistol, not at Rourke, but at the man who had started it all. He aimed for Comatia. He never fired. A blur of motion. Tiabecha, the woman who had hated Emily, who had lost everything, threw the knife from her belt. It wasn't a killing throw. It was a crippling one. The blade sank hilt deep into McCrory's gun arm, pinning it to his own chest. He screamed a high, thin sound. "Sergeant," Rourke roared, "arrest that man for murder and for inciting a war." 2 blue coats dragged a screaming Jonas McCrory from his horse. The regulators who had been with him dropped their rifles, their hands in the air. A fragile peace settled. Rourke, a man of hard, true honor, gave Comatia his word. He would see McCrory hang. He would report the truth to Fort Sill. He offered Emily a place back to the fort. "A white woman's place," he said. Emily looked at the smoking remains of the camp. She looked at Comatia, at Isatai, and at Tiabecha, who was staring at her, the debt between them finally bloodily paid. "No, Colonel," Emily said. "I don't think I have a place there anymore." Rourke nodded, as if he understood. He and his men gathered their dead and wounded, and they left. The aftermath was somber. The Penateca Comanche had won, but the cost was high. Emily recovered, but the healing was slow. Isatai and Tiabecha tended to her. The three of them, the shaman, the mother, and the healer, formed a strange, silent bond. On the night of the next full moon, the tribe held a ceremony. Comatia, his authority absolute, stood before his people. He told the story, all of it. Then Isatai, the medicine man, stepped forward. He painted Emily's face, not as a captive, but as a member. He said that the spirits had sent her. He said that on the night of the battle, the moon had turned to blood as a sign. She was not Tesha Pia anymore. He raised his hands and gave her a new name. Our enemies call us the Lords of the Plains, he chanted. Our friends call us the Penateca. But you are of the moon, which bleeds for the fallen but is born anew. You are the Pia Mutsani. You are the woman of the red moon. Emily Thorne, the widow from Ohio, was gone. She did not marry Comatia. She did not go native. She became something new. She rebuilt her home, not the dugout, but a small cabin of stone on the border of the treaty lands. It was a trading post, a hospital, a neutral ground. She was a bridge. To the settlers she was the Comanche woman, to be feared and respected. To the Comanche she was Pia Mutsani, their healer, their voice. She lived out her days on the high, lonely plains, a legend forged in blood and fire, a testament to the fact that the hardest borders are not the ones on a map, but the ones in the human heart. And that is the story of Emily Thorne, the woman of the red moon. A line drawn in the dust, a life offered in defiance, and a legend forged in fire and an eclipsed moon. What do you think? Was Emily's bravery a betrayal of her own people, or was it the only true path to peace in a land that had no easy answers? We read stories of the Wild West, but the realest ones, the ones that stick with us, are etched in the choices of people caught between two worlds. If her story of courage moved you, please give this video a like. It truly helps our channel find and share more forgotten histories like this. Share it with someone you know who loves a true Western drama. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of the frontier. We have so many more legends, mysteries, and untold stories to share with you. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a single one. Thanks for listening.